I was carrying a birthday cake into my parents' dining room when I heard my father give my house away. The candles were still unlit. The smell of grilled steak and fresh flowers filled the kitchen, while relatives laughed in the backyard, waiting for my younger sister to arrive. Balloons with a giant silver number 30 hung over the fireplace. My mother had spent 2 weeks planning every tiny detail of Olivia's birthday party. I thought the biggest surprise of the evening would be the new SUV my parents had been secretly talking about. I was wrong, because through the half-open kitchen door, I heard my father's voice rise proudly above everyone else's. After tonight, he said, Olivia and Ethan won't have to worry about finding a house anymore. They'll be moving into Lauren's place before the end of next month. Consider it our birthday gift. The room exploded into applause. Someone whistled. Someone else laughed. I froze with the cake still in my hands. My father had just given away the house that belonged to me. Not asked, not suggested, not discussed. Given. I had bought that house myself. Every mortgage payment. Every repair. Every late-night overtime shift that paid for those walls. And while 27 people celebrated inside my parents' backyard, they were planning my eviction. I stood perfectly still. Then I smiled. I walked into the dining room, carrying the birthday cake, and I applauded. Welcome back to Family Secrets Daily. My name is Lauren. I'm 35 years old, and this is the story of how my parents decided that my home would be the perfect birthday present for my little sister, and why they spent the next 48 hours begging me to undo one decision that couldn't be undone. If you've ever been treated like your success belonged to everyone except you, stay with me, because this night changed my family forever. People like to believe families have favorites. Mine didn't. Mine had something much more useful. They had a provider. That provider was me. My parents never actually asked for money, not directly. Instead, problems simply found their way to my phone. Dad's truck broke down. Mom's roof started leaking. My father waited until every conversation stopped. He loved moments like this. The room naturally revolved around him whenever he stood to make a toast. He raised his wine glass. My youngest daughter turns 30 today. Everyone cheered. Olivia smiled through tears. Dad looked around the backyard before continuing. 30 years ago, your mother and I promised we'd always take care of our girls. He paused dramatically. We've done our best. More applause. Mom reached for his hand. He squeezed it proudly, but parents always want to leave their children with something meaningful. He looked directly at Olivia. Something that gives them security. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The two boys stared up at their grandfather with wide eyes. Dad smiled. So your mother and I have decided to give your family a house. The entire backyard erupted. Olivia covered her mouth. No. Dad laughed. Yes. She began crying immediately. Real tears. Happy tears? I can't believe it. Mom hugged her tightly. You deserve it, sweetheart. Dad finally turned toward me. And Lauren has generously agreed. Every head at the table swiveled toward me. 27 pairs of eyes. Waiting. Expecting. Judging. I smiled. Lifted my glass. And clapped. So generous, I said softly. What an unforgettable birthday. Mom looked relieved. Dad smiled proudly. He thought he'd read me perfectly. Olivia stood and hugged me across the table. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. She whispered into my ear. I promise we'll take good care of it. I hugged her back. You should enjoy your birthday. That was all I said. Nothing more. Nothing less. Because I had just realized something. They had built the perfect trap. If I refused, I became the selfish sister who stole a birthday from her struggling family. If I cried, I ruined Olivia's celebration. If I argued, everyone would remember my anger instead of their entitlement. So I didn't give them any of that. I smiled. I applauded. And I started making plans. Driving home that night, I turned the radio off after 5 minutes. Silence felt easier. The road stretched empty beneath my headlights while I replayed every conversation from the evening. Every strange smile. Every suspicious question. The moving truck. The measurements. The blue bedroom. They'd been planning this for weeks. Maybe months, without once asking the only person whose opinion actually mattered. I pulled into my driveway just after 10. For several minutes I stayed inside my car. Looking at my house, the porch light glowed warmly against the white siding. The flower beds I'd planted last spring were finally beginning to bloom. The maple tree Grandpa Henry helped me plant leaned gently in the evening breeze. This wasn't just property. This was every sacrifice I'd ever made. Every birthday I worked instead of celebrated. Every vacation I skipped. Every luxury I postponed. Everything stood right in front of me. And my parents had decided someone else deserved it more. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Because I had done everything right. The next morning my phone buzzed before 8. "Olivia," I answered. She sounded happier than I'd heard in years. I barely slept. I can imagine. The boys are already arguing over bedrooms. I closed my eyes. Bedrooms? Mom said Noah can have the blue one. There it was again. Not if. When. Like the decision had already become reality. "When are you planning to move?" I asked calmly. "Oh." She hesitated. "Dad thought maybe 3 weeks?" 3 weeks. They had scheduled my life without informing me. "I'll let you know." "You aren't upset, are you?" The question almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it came a day too late. I said I'd let you know. Before she could answer, I ended the call. By noon my mother texted, "Your father worries you seemed quiet." I stared at the message. Then replied, "I'd like to talk with both of you tonight." She answered almost immediately, "Of course, sweetheart. Come for dinner." Dinner. Always dinner. As though enough food could solve any problem. That evening I sat across from my parents at the same kitchen table where I'd done homework as a child. Mom poured coffee. Dad folded his newspaper. Nobody mentioned the birthday. Finally I spoke. "I never agreed to give away my house." Dad looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "You told everyone I had." He leaned back. "Oh. As if that's obvious." "It is." "No. It really is, Lauren." My mother reached across the table. "Honey, no." I interrupted gently. "I want to hear Dad explain." He sighed. "You don't have children." I blinked. "What does that have to do with my house?" "Olivia does." "So?" "So she needs it more." The simplicity of his answer stunned me. No apology. No embarrassment. Just certainty. Like he was explaining why umbrellas belong to whoever is standing in the rain. I looked at my mother. "You agree?" She nodded sadly. "You'll always be able to buy another house." I stared at her. "And mine? You've had several wonderful years there." As though houses had expiration dates. As though gratitude required surrender. I spoke very carefully. "I paid for every dollar of that mortgage." "We know. It's legally mine." "We know. I don't want to give it away." Dad's expression hardened. "Lauren," his voice became slower, patient. The voice adults use when correcting unreasonable children. "This isn't about legal ownership. It's about family." There it was. The sentence that had excused every sacrifice I'd ever made. Family. Whenever someone wanted something from me, family. Whenever I hesitated, family. Whenever I paid, family. But somehow, family never seemed to apply in the opposite direction. I leaned forward. "Did anyone ask what I wanted?" Silence. Mom looked away. Dad frowned. Finally, he answered. "We assumed." Exactly. They assumed. Because I always said yes. Until now. "I need some time." Dad relaxed immediately. "Take all the time you need." He smiled confidently. "We know you'll do the right thing." The right thing, meaning the thing they wanted. I stood. Withdrew my hand. Kissed my mother's cheek. Shook my father's hand, and drove home, not because the conversation was finished. Because I finally understood it never would be. You cannot explain ownership to people who believe your entire life belongs to them. The following afternoon, someone knocked on my front door. Ethan. Holding a measuring tape. Behind him, the same moving truck I'd seen at the birthday party. I opened the door halfway. "What are you doing here?" He smiled casually. "Dad said I could start measuring." Measuring? Like I was already gone. "I don't remember inviting you." He laughed. "No need." He lifted the tape measure. "I just need room dimensions." "No." He blinked. "What?" "No." His smile faded. "I drove 30 minutes. I'm sorry. The kids already picked rooms. I'm sorry." "Lauren," his tone changed. "You aren't actually thinking about backing out, are you?" I folded my arms. "Backing out of what?" He stared at me. "The agreement." There wasn't one. His jaw tightened. Your father said. My father doesn't own this house. For the first time, his friendliness disappeared. He stepped closer. We've already told the boys. I didn't. The truck is reserved. I didn't reserve it. My family is counting on this. My house isn't a group project. His face reddened. So that's it? I didn't answer. You'd throw your own nephews out? No. They never lived here. He glared at me for several long seconds, then pointed toward my front door. You know, everyone's gonna think you're selfish. I almost smiled, because he'd accidentally confirmed exactly what I'd realized the night before. That was always the plan, not justice, pressure, public pressure, family pressure, guilt, shame, anything except asking permission. I looked him directly in the eyes. You should probably cancel the moving truck. He laughed. Coldly. No, he said. You'll come around. Then he walked back to his truck. As it pulled away, I watched it disappear down the street. And for the first time, a completely different idea entered my mind. Not revenge. Not anger. A solution. A permanent one. By the time I walked back inside my house, I already knew exactly who I needed to call first. The first person I called wasn't my parents. It wasn't Olivia. And it certainly wasn't Ethan. I called a real estate attorney. Her name was Rebecca Collins. 3 years earlier, she'd handled the paperwork when I refinanced my mortgage. She answered on the second ring. Lauren? I have one question. I'm listening. My name is the only name on the deed. Correct. My mortgage is almost paid off. Also correct. If I decide to sell my house. She laughed softly. Does anyone else get a vote? No. Not my parents? No. My sister? No. My brother-in-law? No. She paused. Lauren, what's going on? I looked around my living room. The afternoon sunlight fell across the hardwood floors I'd installed myself. My circumstances have changed. Do you want to sell? I closed my eyes. For several long seconds, I couldn't answer. Because I loved this house. Every room. Every window. Every memory. But then I remembered my father's words. Olivia needs it more. My mother's words. It's only her. And Ethan standing on my porch with a measuring tape. They would never stop seeing my home as something they could distribute. Not while I still owned it. There was an investor, I finally said. About 8 months ago. Rebecca immediately understood. The one who left you his card? Yes. You still have it? I think so. Call him. His name was Daniel Foster. He remembered my house immediately. I wondered if you'd ever change your mind. I have. When can I see it? Today. By 6 that evening, he was walking through every room. He loved the neighborhood. Loved the condition. Loved the large backyard. When we sat at the kitchen table, he made a cash offer. A fair one. Not perfect, but fair. Rebecca reviewed every page before I signed. Everything was completely legal. Completely final. Closing date. 2 days later. The day before my parents planned to hold a family dinner, where Dad intended to hand Olivia the keys. The closing took 45 minutes. That was all. 15 years of sacrifice. Transferred through signatures. When the final document slid across the table, Rebecca smiled. Congratulations. Funny word. Congratulations, because I had just sold the house I'd dreamed about since college, but she was right. I wasn't losing something. I was protecting myself. The money appeared in my account before noon. By 1 o'clock, the house officially belonged to Daniel. Not me. Not my parents. Not Olivia. Certainly not Ethan. That afternoon I packed the last of my belongings into my SUV. Not because I had nowhere to go. 3 months earlier, my company had offered me a promotion. Regional Finance Director. Chicago office. Higher salary. Better benefits. I'd almost refused, because my parents depended on me. Now, there was nothing left to keep me. I accepted the position that same afternoon. My new apartment would be ready the following week. Everything happened so quickly, it almost felt unreal. But one thing remained, dinner. Dad called that evening. Tomorrow at 6. I'll be there. Good. You'll want to see Olivia's face. I almost answered. Instead, I simply said, I'm looking forward to it. The following evening, the backyard looked even more decorated than it had on Olivia's birthday. Apparently my parents wanted another celebration. More relatives, more neighbors, more witnesses. Dad stood near the patio, talking proudly to everyone who arrived. I overheard him twice. Our youngest finally has a real home. He smiled every time he said it. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Dinner passed quietly. I barely spoke. The folder inside my purse rested against my leg. 2 documents. The deed. The closing statement. That was all. Paper. Sometimes paper changes lives more completely than arguments ever can. Finally, Dad stood. Tapped his glass. Again, the backyard fell silent. My family, he began proudly. There is no greater joy than watching your children succeed. He reached beneath the table, pulled out a small gift box wrapped with a silver ribbon. Everyone smiled. Olivia started crying before he even opened it. Dad lifted out a shiny brass key attached to a wooden keychain engraved with one word. Home. The applause began immediately. He walked toward Olivia. Happy birthday, sweetheart. She reached for the key. Then I stood up. Before you give her that. The applause slowly faded. Dad looked irritated. What is it, Lauren? I smiled politely. I think everyone deserves one important piece of information. I removed the folder, placed it carefully on the table, opened it, pulled out 2 papers, then slid them toward my father. You can't give away something that never belonged to you. He frowned. What? The house? I pointed at the documents. It was always legally mine. He looked confused. So, I smiled gently. It isn't mine anymore. The silence became immediate. Absolute. Dad looked down. His eyes scanned the first page. Then the second. His face slowly lost every trace of color. What? His voice barely existed. Is this? The closing statement, I answered calmly. I sold the house yesterday. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Olivia stared at me. Ethan snatched the papers from Dad's hands. His eyes raced across the signatures. The date. The attorney's seal. His lips parted. No. Yes. You? He looked up. You sold it? I did. You can't. I already did. The boys. They never lived there. The moving truck. I suggested you cancel it. He looked like someone had forgotten how to think. Olivia burst into tears. Not quiet tears. Loud ones. You ruined everything. I shook my head. No, I ruined a plan that should never have existed. Dad slammed both hands onto the table. You had no right. Every person in the backyard turned toward him. I looked at him quietly. No right? It's a family decision. No? I answered. It was a legal decision. He pointed at me furiously. How could you embarrass us like this? I almost laughed. Embarrass, not betray, not manipulate. Embarrass. That was the word he chose. I looked around at everyone watching, then back at him. You embarrassed yourselves. You promised someone else's property. Ethan stepped forward. We already told the boys. I know. They picked bedrooms. I know. They'll be devastated. I nodded. And whose fault is that? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because finally, there wasn't another person left to blame. My mother hadn't spoken once. She simply stared at me. Then whispered, But honey, I thought you didn't need such a big house. There it was. The sentence. The same one I'd heard through the kitchen window. I looked at her. You decided I didn't need it. She began crying. I only wanted to help your sister. I know. You've always been so independent. I know. You always seemed fine. I smiled sadly. That's because nobody ever asked whether I was. She covered her face. For the first time all evening, I almost cried too, because unlike my father, she finally understood. I reached into my purse one last time, pulled out the birthday card, the one containing the $5,000 check. I tore the check in half. Then, into quarters, then laid the empty card beside Olivia. Happy birthday. Nobody said a word. I looked around the table. My life isn't the family emergency fund anymore. I turned toward my father. I won't be paying your property taxes. Toward Ethan. I won't rescue failed businesses. Toward Olivia. I won't finance another fresh start. Finally, toward my mother. I'll always love you. A tear rolled down her cheek. But loving someone, I said quietly, doesn't mean letting them spend your life. I picked up my folder, walked toward the front gate, then stopped, reached into my pocket, removed the spare key to my parents' house. I'd carried it for nearly 12 years. For emergencies, repairs, doctor appointments, late-night phone calls. I placed it gently on the table. "I think you'll manage." Then I walked away. Nobody followed me. Not immediately. The only voice I heard came from behind. My Aunt Carol. She stood slowly, looked directly at my father, and said, "Ray, you never owned that house." She did. No one argued with her. Because nobody could. 1 week later, I moved to Chicago. Started my new position. My apartment overlooked the river. Smaller than my old house, but peaceful. For the first time in years, my phone stayed quiet. No emergencies. No financial crises. No guilt. Just silence. Wonderful silence. My father called 23 times. I never answered. Ethan left angry voicemails. Then desperate ones. Then none at all. Olivia sent long messages, explaining she hadn't known everything. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe she had. Either way, it didn't change what happened. 3 months later, my mother wrote me a letter, not a text. A handwritten letter. It contained only one sentence. I should have asked instead of assuming. That was the first apology anyone had ever given me. I kept it. Because real apologies are rare. People still ask whether I regret selling my house. No, I regret waiting so many years to draw a boundary. The house was never the real issue. Ownership was. Not ownership of property. Ownership of my own life. Because the moment other people believe they get to vote on your future, you stop living your life. You start managing theirs. And I was finally done doing that. If you've ever been the reliable one, the responsible one, the person everyone calls but nobody checks on, remember this: helping family is generous. Sacrificing yourself because everyone expects it isn't love. It's permission. And sometimes the healthiest sentence you'll ever say is simply, "No, thank you for watching Family Secrets Daily." If this story reminded you that your boundaries matter just as much as your kindness, subscribe. And I'll see you in the next story. Olivia's rent increased. Ethan lost another job. The twins needed braces. The washing machine died. The air conditioner stopped working. The property taxes were due. Every emergency somehow became my emergency. And somehow, I always found a way. I was a financial analyst for a healthcare company. The salary was good. The bonuses were better, but nobody ever saw the years it took to reach that point. They only saw that I always managed to write another check. The strange part? I didn't even resent it. At least not then, because helping family felt normal, until helping stopped being appreciated and became expected. My sister Olivia was 5 years younger than me. She had always been beautiful, funny, outgoing, the kind of person who could make friends standing in line at a grocery store. I was the opposite: quiet, organized, predictable. If our family needed someone to entertain guests, they called Olivia. If they needed someone to solve a financial disaster, they called me. Our parents never compared us out loud. They didn't have to. Everyone knew our roles. Olivia brought joy. Lauren fixed problems. Those jobs had been assigned long before either of us realized we never volunteered for them. My house wasn't enormous. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, white siding, blue shutters, nothing extravagant, but every inch of it represented 15 years of work. When I graduated college, I owed almost $90,000 in student loans. I worked days as a junior analyst, evenings tutoring accounting students, weekends doing freelance bookkeeping for local businesses. For almost 6 years, I averaged 4 hours of sleep. Vacations didn't exist. New clothes didn't exist. Restaurants didn't exist. Everything went into one savings account labeled house. When I finally bought it at 31, I cried alone in the empty living room. Not because it was beautiful. Because nobody had handed it to me. Nobody had rescued me. Nobody had signed beside my name. Every brick belonged to the woman I had forced myself to become. The only person who truly understood that was my grandfather. Grandpa Henry. He never had much money, but he understood ownership. When I signed the closing papers, he hugged me longer than anyone else. Then he whispered something I'll never forget. Never apologize for owning something you earned. Simple. Direct. Exactly like him. He died 18 months later. Sometimes I still hear that sentence in my head, especially when I need it most. By the time Olivia's birthday arrived, she'd been married to Ethan for 4 years. They had 2 little boys, a mountain of debt, and a history of making terrible financial decisions. Ethan had started 3 different businesses. Each one failed. Each failure came with another excuse. The economy. Bad timing. Unfair competition. Never him. Never once him. Meanwhile, Olivia worked part-time because daycare was expensive. Every few months, another crisis appeared. Every few months, someone called me. When my parents invited everyone over for Olivia's 30th birthday, I didn't think twice. I even paid for the custom bakery cake. $380. Vanilla with fresh strawberries? Olivia's favorite. I also slipped a birthday card into my purse. Inside was a check for $5,000. I thought it would help them finally catch up on overdue bills. I never imagined I'd leave that night with the check still inside the envelope. The driveway was unusually crowded when I arrived. My aunt's SUV, my cousin's pickup, my uncle's sedan, and something else. A large moving truck sat 2 houses away. At first I assumed one of the neighbors was moving. Then I noticed Ethan standing beside it, talking to the driver, measuring something on his phone. When he spotted my car, he smiled. A strange smile, like someone trying not to ruin a surprise. I rolled down my window. Helping somebody move? He shrugged. Maybe. Then he laughed. I guess you'll find out tonight. Something about that answer settled uncomfortably in my stomach, but birthdays were full of surprises. I ignored the feeling. I picked up the cake and walked inside. Mom hugged me tightly. Oh good, she said. Your father's been waiting for everyone. Waiting? For what? She smiled. You'll see. Dad shook my hand instead of hugging me. He almost looked excited, proud, like someone preparing to deliver incredible news. The backyard buzzed with conversation. Kids ran across the grass. Music played softly through outdoor speakers. Everything looked normal. Almost too normal. Dinner started exactly at 6. Prime rib. Roasted vegetables. Homemade rolls. My mother's best dishes always appeared on birthdays. Olivia sat beside Ethan at the head of the table. She looked genuinely happy, completely unaware of what was coming. Or at least, that's what I believed. Now I'm not so sure. Halfway through dinner, Ethan leaned toward me. So, he asked casually, how long would it take you to move out of your place? I looked up. What? If you ever had to. I laughed awkwardly. I've never thought about it. Hypothetically, I guess a month? He nodded thoughtfully. Good to know. Then he went back to eating. The conversation moved on. Mine didn't. Something about that exchange refused to leave my head. After dinner, I carried empty plates into the kitchen. The sink overlooked the backyard. Voices drifted through the open window. At first, I wasn't listening. Then I heard my mother's voice. The boys can finally each have their own bedroom. Olivia laughed. I've already picked the blue room for Noah. Blue room? Mom continued. I've already picked the blue room for Noah. Blue room? Mom continued. And the backyard is perfect. They'll love it. Someone asked whether Ethan planned to renovate. He answered immediately. First thing, I'll knock down the wall between the dining room and kitchen. My grip tightened around the plate. Dining room? Kitchen? They weren't talking about my parents' house. They were describing mine. Every detail. The blue bedroom. The backyard swing. The wall I'd spent months deciding not to remove. Then my mother said the sentence that split my world cleanly in half. Lauren doesn't need that much house anyway. Silence. Then she added softly. It's only her. Only her. Not Lauren. Not their oldest daughter. Not the woman who spent 15 years building that life. Just. Only her. Like one person somehow deserved less, simply because nobody shared her address. My pulse slowed instead of racing. That surprised me. I expected anger. Instead, everything became perfectly clear. This wasn't an idea. It wasn't a conversation. It was already a decision. They weren't wondering if I'd agree. They were planning the furniture. I carefully placed the plate into the sink, dried my hands, smoothed my dress, and walked back outside, because I suddenly understood something important. If I argued now, I would lose. Not legally. Emotionally. The story had already been written. Successful older sister refuses to help struggling younger family. Nobody remembers details after that headline. No, there would be another way. I simply hadn't found it yet. Then Dad stood up, tapped his glass, and smiled at every person around the table. I've got a birthday surprise. I smiled too, because now I knew exactly what it was.